Hello, I'm V. I wanted to talk about the post-Second Impact world in Evangelion, because Second Impact is really what defines the series. And Second Impact is really a large-scale metaphor for World War II, and how the reconstruction from Second Impact is over by the time the series starts. They skip the reconstruction and we go to when they're done. And some people have said, oh, well, they're still building things in the series. Yeah, the whole point is reconstruction is over and they have a materialist society again. They're not just refugees trying to rebuild their cities anymore. At any rate, it's a social commentary on a general level on how Japan in the 1990s, they were the children of, Anno in his generation, Generation X as well, they were the children of the generation that rebuilt Japan after World War II ended, and Reconstruction was over before they became adults. And then just materialism set in, like Akira. When in Akira, World War III happened, and they just skipped 30 years, and the Reconstruction is over, and they're a materialist society with biker gangs again. So, specifically, though, the problem is, when the show aired in America, it was to a different audience. I mean, the creators openly said they didn't think Americans would even like or watch this show. I think the problem is the audience was entirely different. It might have liked it for different reasons. That when it was coming in fan subs, in particular when the dub was actually made and released in 1997, America was the land of milk and honey, middle of a surplus Clinton years, while Japan was in the middle of a giant recession. The Japanese economy bubble burst in 1990, and the government didn't even respond and try and help because they had a laissez-faire system until 1995. So when the show came out in 1995 and 1996, it was very bad out there, and there was this air of hopelessness and paranoia, and like Shinji, everyone just wanted to curl up into a ball and make it all go away. And America wasn't in the middle of a recession at the time, so people focused on all the existential crap, which the writers later said, that didn't mean anything. That we just threw that in to look cool. It was a social commentary on we were going through a recession, and it didn't connect to American fans. In the Bush years, when it actually aired in America on TV and wasn't just an import, I think it connected to a lot more people because we kind of understood the whole hopelessness and air of that was going on. But, because you see, one of the big design aspects of the series is the opening shot is, it's 2015, 20 years from now, because it was made in 1995, and the opening shot is Sakiel, the angel, gliding through these sunken cities. And the big thing that defines the series is Second Impact, that, the South Pole melted in the Second Impact explosion, the global sea levels have risen and flooded all the major cities on the coasts. And one of the major design aesthetics is that there's sunken skyscrapers jutting out from the coastlines all over the place like jagged teeth in ruins along every coastline. And the Sakiel introduction really highlights that. He's gliding through these ruined office buildings, and the army is waiting for him, and you can also see that there's ruins there as well along the coastline. But that's really in a lot of episodes. I think if you were to define what the look of the series looks like, you might describe it as, it's giant robots fighting giant aliens in the flooded coastal cities of future Japan after the ice caps have melted. Episode 9, when they're fighting Israfel for the first time. And they're fighting at the coastline, and Eva 2 even jumps around from skyscraper to skyscraper to reach it amidst these ruined office towers. And it's really iconic to me that that's what their design aesthetic is, that there's ruined, flooded cities everywhere because of Second Impact. And it's not just there too, and you'll see like episode 10, pervasively there's flooded towers everywhere. Now, again, it's in the late 90s, I don't think that really connected to people, but this aired, when I watched the full series, not the Giant Robot premiere, but when I watched off Adult Swim, and a lot of people did, it premiered on Adult Swim to a large audience in October of 2005, 2 months after Katrina. So the news was still completely full all the time of shots of a flooded New Orleans and asking who to blame and how this happened. So I could turn on from Adult Swim to CNN or something and see people showing footage of a flooded New Orleans, and then switch to Adult Swim, theoretically, and see, there's this flooded coastline over because the polar caps have melted, and they're saying, Katrina happened because global warming is making more hurricanes and stuff, but anyway, and that was only 10 months after the big Boxing Day tsunami on December 26, 2004, Only 10 months later, where there was an undersea earthquake that made a giant tsunami, and it was this giant tsunami that went across the entire Indian Ocean from India to Africa, and it was really eerie how similar the series was in these events. Now, the thing is, they don't explain and walk you through of a lot of this stuff, but one of my things is there is no such thing as a standalone episode of Eva. You have to watch all of them, because they explain things and paint in the corners, like Lord of the Rings or something, where there's just details on the side. And in episode 7, they flash a textbook, which says a lot about what happened after Second Impact. And the Platinum Edition DVDs do translate this fully. There's a screenshot of that on Wikipedia. I'm not going to bother running it here. But, this is all fully available. You can find this. And they say what happened. Well, first off, we know that it was atom exploding, but really, they told everyone, it was meteorite. And that made a mega tsunami that instantly wiped out all the coast, wiped out the whole southern hemisphere. Even in the northern hemisphere, they didn't have the tsunamis, but sea levels rose up quickly enough that it still flash flooded most of the major cities in the north too. But the south was completely gone, the southern hemisphere. And this led to all sorts this happened in September 2000, then this led to all sorts of wars over your refugee crises and food shortages and such. And there were just 6 months of anarchy, of warfare of everyone against everyone. And it didn't end until 6 months later, in February, when they, on Valentine's Day, signed the Valentine's Day Treaty, which ended all the fighting, finally. But in the middle of fighting, India went to war with Pakistan, and they were already pretty hard hit. And Tokyo got nuked. It's just this... It's flattened. Most of it's paved over with cement. Parts of it are flooded with more sunken skyscrapers, and it is just a wasteland. When they show pictures of Japan from orbit, there's just this black hole where Tokyo should be in the power grid, if you look. And what they did in Japan, at least, because Japan's the only part we really focus on, is, well, they needed a capital, so they moved it to Nagano, which then they rebuilt as Tokyo 2, and Matsushiro is part of that region, Nagano. But so they're Tokyo 2 over there. They started building Tokyo 3, which is in Hakone, which is on the slopes of Mount Fuji, on the northern shore of Lake Ashino. That Tokyo is a bit further north, and like you can see Mount Fuji on a clear day from the center of Tokyo, but Hakone's like a spa town of sorts, which is close to Mount Fuji. It's kind of the center of the country because mountains divide the island east and west, but point is, they built Tokyo 3 there because Lilith was there. They built Tokyo 3 around Lilith. If Lilith had been in Kyushu, they would have built Tokyo 3 in Kyushu. Anyway, they needed to rebuild, and more or less what happened was all the first world countries pooled their army and military resources and they donated them to the United Nations to make an armed international military peacekeeping force that would crush all opposition in a desperate attempt to restore order. They needed peace at any cost, but there was just anarchy. So, like, the Japanese military is still stationed in Japan, but they answer to the UN now. Look, they've got UN markings on things. They're United Nations troops and stuff. Now, someone who shall remain nameless opposed my thinking on this for a while, and I thought it was because my evidence was wrong. Really, it turned out he was just opposed to the idea of Russian and U.S. forces ever working together, and it's okay, half the human population of Earth died in Second Impact. 2 billion died directly from the flooding and natural disasters. Another billion died from the wars. 3 billion people, half the human race died. That's a sci-fi condition where, in the face of that big of a disaster, yeah, I think Russia and U.S. and everyone from each side would be working together. Like, and there's proof of this. Like Episode 8, when you see the fleet that escorts Eva 2, it's got Eastern Bloc and Western Bloc ships in it, like Over the Rainbow, they named it because that's an inside joke to another anime show. But that's the USS Harry S. Truman, which is the last big aircraft carrier finished before World War II. And I think the idea is that, they've built other ones in real life since then, like the Reagan, but that if the global economy got wrecked in Second Impact, they wouldn't bother building more supercarriers. The Truman was the last one finished before 2000, so logically it's their flagship, they say, probably the UN forces, because it's the last big carrier finished. But look at the names. There are Russian ships and American ships in the same fleet. I mean, there's like a Kirov next to Kentucky and Illinois. They pooled their militaries under the UN. And you see in other shots of the fleet, they're all working together now. And what happened was, like I said, they donated their militaries to them. And right now, in the present day, Japan's military is called the JSDF, Japanese Self-Defense Force, and they have subdivisions like the JASDF, Japanese Air Defense Force, Self-Defense Force, and so on. And the idea is those guys were donated to the UN, so the JASDF now answers to the UN, but they're stationed in Japan. But they say in one of the pamphlets that come with the DVD box sets that the Nansha Islands are these islands that are uninhabited between the Philippines and China, but they were recently found to be rich in oil. And regional strategists say it's most likely cause for a major war in that region. And that in 2003, China and Vietnam went to war over the islands. Nansha Islands is the Chinese name for them, so I think China won. So this got Japan scared. They needed their own military, not just the stuff they donated to the UN. So they made their own new military. The JASDF is in Japan, but they answer to the UN. They needed their own military that answered only to the Japanese government. So they made the JSSDF. They're like the Marines. They're this group of crack troops that have tanks and planes and commandos and things. And they're the Japanese Strategic Self-Defense Force. And they pop up most prominently in End of Eva, but they don't just pop up all at once as if they've never been announced before. They mention them throughout the series. So that's why they're there when they invade Nerve HQ. But the people really pulling the strings, and they don't clearly explain this very well, it's Seele. That's German word for soul. And you see, Seele are simply, they're the Illuminati. Like angels and demons, they're like Freemasons, they're the Illuminati, just a generic Illuminati group. They were there when Jesus Christ had his moment of doubt and pain. They stuck around St. Petersburg when they saw it was a time for a change. They've been pulling the strings of international politics since day one. They're the Illuminati. And they run the world, they run the United Nations, but the thing is, they make the public facade, the public appearance they like to keep up, is this fiction that they're just a powerful subcommittee of the UN, called the Human Instrumentality Committee. In private, they're actually the group that runs the UN. They're the puppet masters of the UN. But they like to publicly say, oh, we represent different countries. And you see, the thing is, they only mention this in production materials and script notes and things. Now, there's 6 guys there. One of them is Gendo, and the head of the committee is Chairman Keel. And there's 4 other guys they never name, but they all represent different countries. And you kind of get the impression that demonstrates who are the most powerful countries anymore after Second Impact. It would logically be supposedly represented on the Seele Instrumentality Council when really they run it. Now, the full Seele Council are all 12 guys, and this is the inner council of the Seele Council, these 5 guys. So there's these 5 guys we see, and there's another 7 we don't see, that they only have those audio-only full meetings. But of these 5, they actually mention in the script who represents what country, and gives you an idea of who's most powerful. That Chairman Keel represents Germany, and the other guys are just denoted by color. There's Mr. Green, Mr. Red, Mr. Blue, Mr. Yellow, and Mr. Pink. I know that's an old joke, sorry. Reservoir Dogs. No, there's 4 guys, but they only know by color. And the actual breakdown is the United States is Mr. Green. The United Kingdom is Mr. Red. And they're on that side. And the other ones are Mr. Blue is Russia, and Mr. Yellow is France. They don't call them Mr., because that's their colors. So these are more or less the most powerful countries anymore, along with Japan. I don't think Gendo officially represents Japan on the Seele Council, but he's there. So besides Japan, Japan's the one we see the most on how they've rebuilt. How are all the other countries handling rebuilding from everything? Well, we see Germany handle everything pretty well. They don't have a big coastline. They're pretty far north. They have 2 Nerf branch bases, and every once in a while we have an Oscar flashback. We see bits and pieces of Germany. And also, like, in the preview for Episode 7, they say Eva 2 left Wilhelmshaven, Germany. That's like a port city. I'm surprised that survived, but So Germany has OSCA, and they do a lot of Eva stuff there. They also have their energy research division there that researches Shamshell's S2 organ. But as for the other one we see a lot of is the United States. When the U.S. has two branch bases. One is in Nevada, which I think is heavily implied to be Area 51, is where they're building Eva 4, and that explodes. And the other one they were building was, I'm told, it's the MIT campus, or where MIT moved to in Massachusetts once Boston got flooded, either or. They got another branch base in Massachusetts that Eva 3 was built in and takes off from there. But in terms of how the United States is doing after Second Impact, you would only know this from... they don't translate this because it's just the thing where they paint in the corners. In Episode 11, Fuyutsuki's reading a newspaper, and if you look at it, the top says, U.S. economy worst in the world, and the bottom there says, U.S. set to lower interest rates yet again. See, this isn't just Second Impact stuff. You see on the chart, they were doing pretty well until like 2012, 3 years before the story. Relative to Germany and Japan, and everyone rebuilding. In 2015, the U.S. is in the middle of a giant recession. This is actually a running joke throughout the series, written on newspapers or stray television reports, that the U.S. economy is terrible. And it's sort of one of those jokes of, oh no, it's the future of 20 years from now. Aliens are invading, the polar caps have flooded, and oh god, the U.S. economy is in the toilet and they're in the middle of a giant recession. One of those things you think will never happen, haha, because think about it. Japan was in a recession when this was made, and they like to fantasize that, 20 years from now we'll be doing okay, and the U.S. will be the ones in a recession. Haha. That'll never happen. But, it's a running joke. There's another thing, like in Episode 7, I think this is a Chinese delegate talking again about they're going to build more AVA units, and he says the Security Council approved the plan. Everyone, well, all members except for the United States. But don't worry, those people are allergic to unemployment. They have a big unemployment problem because their economy is bad, so they'll eventually come around to the plan. They mentioned throughout the series, just in the background, the U.S. economy is in the middle of a giant recession. They have rampant unemployment relative to the other countries after Second Impact. Like 3 years before the series starts, they've had a recession in 2012, and that's just in the background. I think it's pretty funny. Apart from that, so the countries that are left that are prominent now are Japan, the United States, up to a certain level, Germany, also the UK, France, and Russia. Now, the thing I noticed in that was that those are mostly the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council in the real world, except for Germany. Nikhil Lawrence represents Germany, but Germany isn't a permanent member of the Security Council. They replaced China. And, well, is China present in the Evaverse? Yes, they are. Various times they mention China. They don't mention them as, like, having an actual branch base, but near the end of the series, when Hugo's saying, I heard from a contact in Shanghai that they're going to be building mass production AVA units. But the really big hint we get at who's left is when, in End of Eva, they're getting attacked by all the other Magi units around the world. And logically, they would use all the ones they had. So these must be the 5 other ones they have. There shouldn't be a 6th one. And they have one other nerve branch bases in Matsushiro. We saw that. That's a secondary testing base where they made Eva 3. They have one in the U.S., Massachusetts, where they built Eva 3, the test in Matsushiro. And there was another branch base in Area 51 that's been destroyed. And there's apparently 2 branch bases in Germany, one in Berlin and one in Hamburg. And they keep saying, Asuka's from Nerve Base 3. And I'm never able to tell, was she from Berlin or was she from Hamburg? But she was from one or the other, where she was in their base where they were building Eva 2. Notice they also say there is a prominent Nerve base in Beijing. And they never say, is it a full base or not? But they say the mass production Evas were built in 7 locations around the world. And, China built Unit 8, 5 and 6 were built by Germany. So... some might have doubled up, but it's those 5 countries, and China is doing fairly well. But to the point that when the Japanese Prime Minister is being asked, hey, should we rebuild NERV headquarters, the options are we could rebuild it in Germany or we could rebuild it in China. Maybe they could have rebuilt it in the U.S. if it weren't for the fact that Area 51 blew up. So maybe that's why they don't mention the U.S. as a viable option. But apart from that, also, like, what are other parts of the world like? Antarctica is completely gone. Even microbial life has been wiped away because Adam made an anti-AT field. Not that many people live there, of course. But, yeah, so the world is... The southern hemisphere just isn't there anymore, though. I mean, India and Pakistan are just gone. They got hit by the brunt of second impact of the giant mega tsunamis because they're on the Southern Ocean. They face it. And on top of that, they got into a war over refugees like a matter of days after second impact happened. I don't know if it went nuclear. This was made in 1995. They didn't know Pakistan and India didn't have nukes back then. Now they do, but I think it was a nuclear war. They don't even mention India, even though it's one of the biggest economies in the world now. But India and Pakistan just aren't there anymore. The subcontinent got wiped out by second impact. They weren't one of the lucky ones. But this other thing they mentioned just pervasively throughout the series is, okay, the problem I have is I think it's a commentary on how, like, Japan didn't recover from World War II and everything was sunshine and lollipops and rainbows everywhere. I think whenever there's a disaster, you fix up just enough so that the top people are doing well again, and the bottom people don't really do that well. Like Katrina, it was weird how we really didn't fix up things after Katrina. That 2 years later, they're saying people are still living in trailers and stuff. It's just the cameramen and the news crews went away, but there was never a major reconstruction effort. We're still just refugees down here, and they just decided it wasn't news anymore. That, there's still problems in the world. Like when Japan rebuilt from World War II, I think the problem is there were still lots of student protests in the 60s and things saying, no, we still have social problems and work problems and things. And you haven't just made this great utopian society again. So I didn't live in Japan, I don't know this, but I think it's a play on that at first you think, wow, they amazingly rebuilt it into utopia like Akira. They go, no, like the people on the bottom actually are still having a lot of problems. And the first world just fixed itself. Like in episode 7, they mention that 20,000 people in multiple countries are starving because they spend money on the Evangelion project. That there's still refugee crisis problems all over the place in the damaged parts. Japan's one of the reconstructed zones. One of the other areas that are still having problems, they just like to say, and children, when they're in school, children, your mothers and fathers worked hard and we managed to rebuild the world. And that's kind of propaganda because they didn't fix everything. Just like when they rebuilt from World War II, it wasn't like utopia. So there's still starving people outside of Japan because there's an Evangelion project. And one of the big things in Navy you have to remember is they give hints of information in barely audible TV broadcasts that are like playing off screen. That like you could not hear these unless you turn the volume at the point that the regular dialogue is deafening. And you know them from the script, or the 5.1 audio wasn't even dubbed. This line here was dubbed, but like in episode 14 there's a news broadcast that says there was a terrorist attack in the Nansha Islands. Even in 2015, there's still wars and things going on off in the third world, off away from the first world countries that managed to pool their resources and rebuild themselves. But the problem is, it's like if you were living in the suburbs in Japan after Reconstruction was allegedly over, you'd think everything was fine, not for the working class people. Or America, we go, oh, we're great, we recovered from 9/11 or something. And really, no, there's all sorts of crappy problems going on in the world. But like Pakistan is falling apart these days, or Iraq or something. The problem is, we live in a society where we can turn the TV off. These are events on the news to us, and like Israelis can't turn the TV off. India, again with the Pakistan problems, they can't turn the TV off and make problems go away. There's social unrest in their streets. But America's got this mentality of these are amusing television stories we can turn off if we don't like paying attention to them. And I don't know if this is a commentary on it, but it really fits this for me. That why don't they focus on all these other... There's still problems going on in the world politically. Why don't they talk about them? And it's because they live in a culture that can turn the TV off. It's as simple as that. It's playing in the background, the characters aren't focusing on it, because on a day-to-day basis, does a yaoi fangirl in America really get affected by what's going on in Iraq or something? She doesn't. to the common kid on the street, it really doesn't affect them what's happening in the third world and all the wars and stuff. So they don't worry about it because there's not fighting in the streets here. So it's all in the background. It's not important. It's not what the story's about. The thing is, Evangelion isn't Gundam. This isn't like Operation Adesta or Operation British. This isn't a political show. So, these guys were giant Gundam fans. They said we loved Gundam. So, I don't know if they stuck these in as little things for other fanboys like themselves if you really wanted to find it. You're like, what is the political situation after such a disaster? That's very interesting. They just don't really focus on it because it's not what the show is about. And it's happening off in the background, but they aren't focusing on it because that's not the story. Sort of like, bad example, Star Wars, you could say, is a giant intergalactic civil war between the Empire and the Rebels. But really what the real story was about was the throne room scene between Luke and the Emperor, and a personal fight on that level. And the galaxy hung in the balance, and Luke did care about the Rebels, so that's not really the same problem. But it's just that these political things, and like, why are there aliens attacking? They don't explain, they explain that in supplementary stuff. I'll explain in another video about Angels. It's not important to what the story was about the characters. And you have to ask, are we in a culture where it really matters to kids on the street what's going on in the news? No, they can turn the TV off. So all this stuff about refugees that are still 15 years later in other areas, they don't care. They live in a first world country. They're at the point where they can turn the news off and lie to themselves and say, we live in a utopia that rose from the ashes again, and everything is great again. The world rebuilt. When really it kind of didn't. So, in summary, I know I've been rambling. Second impact happens. Mega tsunamis wipe out the southern hemisphere almost instantly. There's not much left. Coastal flooding takes out all major cities, even in the northern hemisphere, although that takes, a couple of days flash flooding. Based on the Sele Council, the most prominent countries anymore are Japan, Kiel represents Germany, and also the USA, Russia, the UK, and France. China is kind of important too. I don't know if it's a full, that has a full branch base, it might. India and Pakistan are just gone. The thing I think is funny is, if you actually look, they say Adam was found under Mount Markham. And if you look where Mount Markham is, it's a bit further towards the pole than McMurdo. It's on the side of Antarctica that is closest to New Zealand. So I think it's really funny that the closest industrialized, or any country that was closest to second impact's ground zero, was New Zealand. So even though Weta Workshop are such big fanboys of Evangelion, their country was wiped clean off the map. They were closest to ground zero of second impact. Flash floods would have, they're a tiny island comparatively, they would have been destroyed and raising sea levels. I don't think New Zealand is there anymore. They bore the brunt of second impact. So I think it's a little funny, but really, that's the world they live in. And the first world supports military resources, pool them to maintain order. There's still problems in the third world. It's fixed enough in the first world that a kid who's 14 doesn't need to worry about that. That it simply doesn't affect them. They can turn the TV off. As for what kind of world they live in, I think it's cool that when you're designing a near future, because when you're designing the future, you can just make up all sorts of crazy things and they fit their own world verse. And if you're doing something set in the present, it has to be accurate to the present. But it's, how do you design something that's really tricky, I think, if Weta makes a live-action film, that's close enough to us that it's only 20 or maybe 40 years from now. And it's just slightly more advanced. Everything in Nerve HQ looks like something out of, they said they based it on the Andromeda strain. It looks like a clean room and a research base. And all the really advanced stuff is with the Evas. But like when they're in Misato's apartment and stuff on the street, they've got slightly more advanced stuff, but even though Star Wars can seem like a hackneyed cliche at times, the thing I think Lucas was great for introducing was it's called used future. And the used future aesthetic is that things look banged up, they look lived in. It's not pristine like Star Trek. Things look like they've been duct taped together when they broke and to fix them, and they're functional on-the-spot repairs were made. And this looks like people live it. Like Misato's apartment looks dirty, like she actually lives there, and there's chips and cans around. It looks more real that way. And like a beer can is still a beer can, but like TV and computers are the things that get really advanced. but like just around the house things, well, they don't need to have like super sliding doors that are automatic in every room. You know, they've got regular doors. And it's just this overall design aesthetic that it's the near future, slightly more advanced than us, just a few decades. That, you know, the subtle thing is, episode 1, you see that they use electric cars now that run on batteries. You know, Masato steals the car batteries so they can get back to base. They've got electric cars and everything. And we already have laptops and cell phones, of course, in 1995, but they try to show in school they use them a lot more prominently. And it's not like Star Trek and look at all the gadgets I'm using. It's just tech stuff like, you know, how fast phones and computers and even cars advance. But it's slightly... I really think Children of Men, the Clive Owen movie, did a very good job of this, where they were showing how cars are a little different and like phones and ads and TV are a little more advanced. And there's more advertising everywhere, but it still looks like a used future and it's grungy. Of course, Children of Men was living in an apocalyptic world in dystopia, where everything is supposed to look like it's actually functioning pretty well, or like Blade Runner, I guess, where, you know, certain things are more advanced. But yeah, Children of Men did a pretty good job of that, showing it's a near future where things are just a little bit more advanced than they are now. And that is the post-Second Impact world they live in. That those are the countries that are most powerful now. It doesn't really affect them on a personal level because they're just kids living in one of the reconstructed zones. And technology is a bit more advanced. You know, this isn't Gundam. It's not about politics. I just wanted to look at this because I'm interested in this kind of thing. Now, I'm going to post this up. I know I've been rambling, but I'm just trying to do a lot of these in rapid succession rather than do none at all. So, I'm going to have to close off and say I'm pleased to meet you, and I hope you guessed my name, but what's puzzling you is the nature of my game.